Hello, everyone, and welcome to Think Yourself Healthy podcast. I'm your host, Heather Duranja. Let's dive into today's episode. Hello, everybody. On today's episode of Think Yourself Healthy, we have a special guest. Her name is Amy Guerrero. Amy helps humans in recovery heal past traumas, release shame, guilt, overthinking, and all the things that hold them back from healthy relationships with money, sex, pleasure, business, and beyond. Well, Amy, thank you so much for being here. And I'm feeling a bit targeted right now because I think everything on this list is something that I've had to overcome specifically in like the last 12 years. So I am so excited to have a conversation with you today and dive deep into all of these things. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Oh, I love our energy together already.
I know. I'm
Yeah.
feeling it. I am so feeling it.
Yeah.
So, Amy, tell the audience a little bit about you and what brought you to this place, how you started doing this work.
Yeah. I went on a journey. I'm going to give you all the very short version of it because there's so many good things for us to talk about today. So my story is very important, but I can give you a very cliff noted version. So long story short is I've been on this journey of trauma lives in my body. I didn't really ever find the mentors exactly to guide me there in a way that I wanted to. So I started, as I am, guiding myself
Mm-hmm.
through yoga, through somatic experiencing, through all these different things, through hallucinogens,
Mm-hmm.
through partying, of course, because I knew that this trauma was there.
Mm-hmm.
Partying always worked the fastest, right? To just make it go away, but also expand my mind and allow me to be who I was in my essence, but I needed to numb parts of me to allow other parts of me to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And around 35 or 36, I was making this list of all of the things that I thought would heal me so that I could step into my 40s and have all my trauma healed.
Right.
Well, I made the list, I started on the things, and I found my birth mom. And shortly after that, I became chemically dependent on alcohol, like real deal chemically dependent, like no joke, could not function without the chemical in my body. That's how dependent I was.
Mm-hmm.
And when I became dependent, it was so confusing
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't understand the modalities of sobriety that
Right.
were being taught to me in the treatment centers, in the 12-step programs. I did all of the programs. I read all of the books. I'm been this, very intelligent, go-getter entrepreneur my whole life. So I was like, well, I'm going to digest all of this information, but the shame and the guilt that those programs brought into my nervous system activated all of my trauma and put my protective mechanisms right back up.
Yeah.
And so it's just a really confusing 2 years. But the very first treatment center I went to, I started writing how I thought recovery could look like for me.
Okay.
And this was in 2014. And that's how the business of my business that I have now got started. It's like, okay, this doesn't work, but this does. I don't agree with this language because it's not nervous system friendly, but this does. And so I started basically rewriting a program, but I felt alone and isolated and
Mm-hmm.
all of the things in that. So it took about 2 years for me to stay stopped from the substance. There was several suicide attempts in
Mm-hmm.
those couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2016, I was just not dying. And I actually called a treatment center not far from you in Hemet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was already really, really drunk. I got really, really drunk. And I was like, this is going to be the last time I do this. And I went there and they saw my passion
Mm-hmm.
and they let me do things. I had to go to group. I had to do all the things to tick all the boxes for insurance,
Right.
but they let me do my own thing. They gave me a room to study in. They gave me a lot of autonomy, and I started my business 3 months later.
Wow. That is beautiful. And I applaud you for having the courage, the bravery to give yourself the permission to seek something so much bigger and truly have the ability to step into your power. a lot of us don't give ourselves that permission, and we hold ourselves back, and we keep staying stuck in the negative loop over and over. And in my opinion, a lot of it has to do with starting with forgiveness. We have to forgive ourselves for what brought us to that place. And if we can't surrender to that, we're going to find ourselves repeating the process over and over and over again. And usually they have pretty negative outcomes. It either ends in death by suicide or, an overdose. It's really sad.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't have to be that way. And Heather, like, I just total feel what you just said, and want to tell the listeners, like, when I really allowed myself, even if all of the white coats, I call them, like, I love clinical, like, I think clinical works in so many different capacities, that it wasn't working to see me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I kicked away what the white coats were saying to me, and was like, I have physiology, like actual physiology that doesn't agree with this.
Right.
You forcing me to ignore my physiology is not going to work.
Absolutely.
Right? You telling me to call myself something that I physiology like says no. And then I'm like, oh, but I'm an alcoholic, right? No, it wasn't going to actually land and be who I am if I ignored my physiology. Oh, come on, tell me.
Right.
Yes.
I am literally like over here. Oh, what you just said, how, you being in a situation where you're being encouraged to call yourself an alcoholic, and then everything within your physical body is going, no, this doesn't feel right. This for me is a big place to speak about, because in my opinion, I feel like with the way that a lot of our facilities protocols work, they're holding us back, right? And if we're constantly attaching our identity to being an alcoholic, that subconscious brain is always going to want to pull us back into its core belief of being the alcoholic. And so I really encourage people, go through the process, do the steps, whatever you have to do. But there does come a point where you're going to have to release that identity of being the alcoholic or the heroin addict or whatever it might be, in order to truly allow yourself to expand into your new reality. Otherwise, that subconscious brain is going to constantly trigger the central nervous system and bring it back to its baseline state of survival in order to get its fix of chemicals.
Absolutely. And that's why the going back to the old coping mechanism is such a big part of what people call recovery. And I'm like, I did it for sure based on I was going against my physiology. Right. And like, something I just want to introduce early in the podcast too, is that it keeps us in that triangle, that drama triangle of being the victim.
Yes.
And then also the persecutor. And then waiting for someone outside of us to save us. Yeah. And like, it's such a big part of the thing. Yeah. I'm just like, oh my goodness. I had a client tell me the other day, was really like angry with me because I was coaching, and I was like, that's okay. You can be mad at me. And they're like, well, I'm just an addict. And I'm like, oh, so now we're like 12 again.
Right.
Playing the victim of, and I get it. Like, right. It's so much easier to blame it on being an addict than it is to take full responsibility. And I take full responsibility for all of my actions. And I did some very weird things. I mean, my bottom was bottom.
I feel you, girl.
Very yucky. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, when I look back at my journey, and I think about a lot of the things that I engaged in to validate and provide evidence to my core belief system, it's like, wow, but I learned how to drop out that shame and guilt around it. And the shame and guilt is what held me back for so long and kept me repeating the process. And when I finally gave myself permission to have the forgiveness, the self-forgiveness for all those skeletons over there, it was a game changer. I also feel that it's important for me to talk about those skeletons and share those dark stories, because it allows me to let go of the attachment to them. When you're holding them in the closet and you're keeping them a secret, it's just manifesting all of this, all of this emotional trauma within the body that then presents physical disease. So in my opinion, it's a very important part of the process to face those skeletons, to applaud the skeletons, recognize the purpose that they served, and then let go of it.
Yes. Yeah. So much of the growth process is release.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that that's where it gets confusing, because maybe if you're listening right now, maybe the people that you're hanging out with, the only thing that's really holding that relationship together is agreeing with each other's patterns.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that that's because then we're not releasing the story, because if we release the story, then that means that we don't get that connection with those people. And this is, like, in my opinion, how we'll change the recovery world and spaces, and one family at a time, is like, let those people go if they're not ready to stop identifying as the victim.
Yeah.
There will be new people that come into your life, because when you hold on too tight there's no room to release. And then you're trying to hold it all, and it's exhausting. And that's where the chronic inflammation in the body like gets out of control. And suddenly we have another thing, right?
Well, and the other thing that starts to present helps to justify the victim mentality. Like, why me? When do I get my break? I can't tell you how many times I told myself that story.
Yeah. Yeah. And then again, like I think maybe I would love, because I want to talk to you like all day long. But let's talk about forgiveness, because I think that that's a concept that people talk about a lot, but don't actually feel the physiology of what forgiveness is. I'm so curious, like, what your journey to forgiveness was like, and I'm happy to share mine.
Let me tell you, I know my audience has heard it, but man, so I went through, I've had a lot of stuff in life. And it was really after I went through the divorce process where I was just so angry, so resentful, so hurt, so devastated. I kept waiting. Oh, today's going to be the morning where I'm going to wake up and feel like I can forgive. I can forgive him. I can forgive me. I can forgive all of those that were a part of it. So, for years, I'm waiting and waiting for the feeling to overcome me, and it doesn't come. So one day I'm driving in my car and I'm listening to the radio, which I didn't typically do. So it was like one of those universal interventions where I'm listening to the radio. These two talk show hosts are chatting about forgiveness. And then one of them says, forgiveness is not a feeling, it is a choice. And I literally almost wrecked my car. I was like, wait, what? I pulled over and I was like, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that this whole damn time, forgiveness is a choice? It is not a feeling. And that's when I made the choice. I chose right then that I was going to let go. I was going to surrender. I was going to choose to forgive myself, forgive all of those around me, and most importantly, my ex-husband. So it was a beautiful moment. And I will forever be grateful for that universal intervention of just that one line being delivered that shifted my entire perspective around how to approach forgiveness.
Oh, I love that. It's so beautiful. And like, especially after such a big life event, because marriage for 17 years, it's like,
yeah,
there's so much heart opening love and making children and all of the things. And it's like, oh, yeah.
I think for myself, one of the biggest lessons around forgiveness was what happened with my youngest daughter. So when after my divorce was finalized 2 years later, custody battle begins again, and it was extended for another 2 years, got to a point where I had to make the choice and recognize that my daughter was the one suffering, that I was never going to win in this situation. It was going to continue to come at her expense, and that I needed to be the bigger person, put my ego aside and step down and do what was best for her, which, was really, really hard. And so after I had to surrender custody of her to her father, I held a lot of shame and guilt for having to make that choice. I felt like such a terrible mother. when people would ask me about my children and I would say, well, one's here with me in California, the other's back in Missouri. And they would give me this, look of, well, like what? And the shame that I carried around that. And finally I had to choose. I had to say, you know what, Heather, you did what was best. You have to applaud your efforts. There's so many people out there who would never, ever make that choice. And you did, and it was in her best interest. And because of that, you did a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So,
Oh gosh. I mean, that's the family system healing,
yeah.
in my opinion.
And I
Yeah.
raised her for 5 years. She wasn't a part of our everyday lives. And during the pandemic, once schools shut down and she had to go back to her dad's house, she called me up and she said, Mom, I'm ready. I'm ready to come home. And it was honestly the most beautiful day of my life. And just this week, she said to me, Mom, can we record a podcast together? I want to talk about our relationship as mother and daughter and the things, the obstacles, the challenges that you and I have had to navigate and the beautiful relationship that we have. And when I like a mother's dream, literally, I was just like, oh, I am so honored. So we're going to be recording a podcast tomorrow night talking about that. And I cannot wait.
Oh my gosh, with the new moon energy and all of that, so the time change and going into the like literal winter. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful.
Talk about releasing and allowing for new things to come in. We're ready.
Yeah, so beautiful. And I feel like that's, the reasons that full acceptance got me to forgiveness, right? It's like, the shame was so thick that accepting that was like actual my literal body who went through all of this. Because my first way of escaping was fantasy, which we would call clinically dissociation, right? Like I dissociated from anything and everything and made up my own version of it so that I could survive as a child.
Right.
But that stops working as an adult, right? Like you're in a reality. And literally just being with it, like, Amy, you did that. Those were the choices. That's all you could do. Every relationship you had with a man, like that's the best that you could do. That's what you knew. You always had your guard up, like, like really like just stating it out loud and noticing and naming it and feeling the sensations that would happen in my body. And then I forgive you. And literally watching that process like de-thaw from my nervous system. And I want to be very, very clear that it is not over. It is not over. Like, I do a lot of practices, and even this morning I was met with a lot of resistance and like some closure. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, can I be with that too? There's another area that I get to uncover, discover, get curious about, and allow it to release. So I think that there's so much of a choice, and then there's the somatics of where we're gripping on to life.
Right.
Gripping onto our past, gripping onto the future that hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And forgiveness is like, maybe I can let go a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then I'll grip again later that day.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think that if we as a society can start changing the conversation around all of the challenges, all of the hardships and the big choices and things that we're faced with on a regular basis, if we can really shift our perspective and get excited about it, it's the energetically what it does to your physical body, and then the outcomes that you have the ability to receive are so powerful. And in my opinion, this is how we get out of all of these corrupt systems in which we've been enslaved for so long, So I have a question for you.
Tell me.
When it comes to that core root wound, was the wound around abandonment and rejection from adoption, from being surrendered, I guess is the best way to put it?
Yeah, surrender. My father stepped up though. So my father was there. But yes, absolutely. 100%. And that was the wound that my little body took on. Right. So this started way before I was verbal.
Mhm.
And then she was very unstable, and she tried to come back and come back and come back. And every single time it was like re-traumatizing that original incident.
Yeah.
Um, and the first manifestation of it was constipation. Yeah. So I had enemas as young as like 9 months old. Like they
Yeah.
were already like forcing
Yeah.
me. And my poor little system. Can you imagine? Like I
Yeah.
just look at that little baby and I'm like, oh
We were
goodness gracious.
we were in the same boat. This is something that I like to talk a lot about with recovery individuals and trauma, is that most of us have a nervous system that gets programmed within the womb for its baseline state of survival. And when I look back at my mom's circumstances, she was 17-year-old girl, she was living in a household with a very codependent mother. Her father was an abusive alcoholic, verbally and physically. She had an 8-year-old brother that she had to be responsible for. My biological father wasn't present. He was too busy consuming substances for his own, escape. And so my poor mom, I think back and I'm like, wow, what she must have gone through. And as a result of that, all of the chemicals that her body was producing and releasing was literally programming my nervous system for its baseline state of survival. And then when I was born, I immediately came out of the womb and had all kinds of issues, skin issues, allergies, constipation. They literally were having to give me enemas to promote my first bowel movement because my body could not do it. And then, unfortunately, as a result of that, I struggled into my early 30s thinking that constipation was just the norm, that,
Oh,
holding 10 pounds of fecal matter in my colon was just how everyone's body reacted. I had no idea that it was so deeply rooted to my root chakra center and the lack of security of basic human needs being met. Oh man, I've discovered so many amazing things on this journey. And through each discovery, it allows me to let go of all of the anger, the resentment, the fear, the shame, the guilt, all of the things. And I have such a profound respect for my mother and all of the things that she has gone through. And knowing that she did the best job she could based upon what she had inherited from her own environment really allowed for me to let go of the judgment and the criticism of her parenting practices. You know what I mean?
oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, our stories are so, so, so similar in that way. And, um, my birth mom actually, reached out, I don't know, about 3 months ago.
Mhm.
And, I totally like, I'm just like, okay, like she's so in her patterns. And I know I never, I don't ever know like that we'll be able to have a relationship
Mhm.
because her patterns are so strong.
Yeah.
And so, she only knows what she knows.
Right.
But I am not like, I can say sitting here right now, like, I do not have a response in my body anymore over it
Yeah.
because I'm just like, oh, you had some yucky things, like really awful things.
Mhm.
And if you ever get on the other side of it, is not any of my business. It's
Right.
just not. It's just absolutely not. And she wanted me to take responsibility for something that happened when I was 7 years old in her last communication to me. And I was like, I just blocked her from everything again because I was just like, I mean, her nervous system is stuck at
Mhm.
that age, right? And so she's putting that on me.
Right.
And because I've done so much, healing, and I can just be like, oh, no, thank you,
Mhm.
totally see where this is going. But 10 years ago, even 7 years ago, when I went to find her, like there was no way I had the nervous system capacity to hold that boundary.
Yeah.
And so, this process of recovery and choosing it over and over and over again and choosing self-forgiveness and choosing self-trust,
Mhm.
it's a constant like choice.
It
It's
is.
100% a choice. And I was saying that to a client yesterday. I'm just like, it is, where you're at right now, where you're landing right now is such a choice, and you're not making it.
And so, you know what? Gosh, this is such a truth statement, because I find so many people choose to stay in that resistance, allowing themselves to be the victim. It serves a purpose. It validates the stories. It validates the core wounds. And unfortunately, we have to make the decision to let go of all of that, to face the unknown, face the uncertainty, and take responsibility for our actions. I know for myself that in 2018, I ended another really, unhealthy relationship where I had sought out another unemotionally available man and poured my heart and soul into the relationship, trying to get them to recognize all of my gifts, all of my worth, all of the value that I had to bring to the table. And when that relationship came to an end, it was a pretty devastating situation for me, because this person had encouraged me to completely let go of my business. He isolated me. I had nothing left. And when I was very suicidal. And I remember one morning sitting at the kitchen table as I'm looking out at the ocean view, living the dream life, right? No, not so much. And I looked down at my wrist, and all I could think about was wanting to go up to the bathroom, slit my wrist, and bleed out as I take my last breaths and views of this beautiful scenery with so much misery in my heart. And I was heading up the steps to go to the bathroom. And I hit that second step, and something said to me, get out of the house, go outside. And so I listened, and I left the house. I went outside, and I started walking. And the further I got from the home, the deeper I could breathe, the more life I felt coming into my body. And that was when I made the choice right then. I'm never going back. I had a pair of flip-flops on, a cell phone in my back pocket, t-shirts and jean shorts, no purse, no money, no nothing. And I called up my girlfriend and I said, I'm aimlessly walking around Dana Point. I need some help. I was like, come get me. And I went back to her house, slept on her couch for a couple of weeks, and then allowed myself to be the victim as much as I wanted, felt all the pain, all the suffering, all of the justification. And then in that moment, I realized, you know what, Heather, the only common denominator here is you. It's you. You keep drawing in, choosing these kind of relationships to validate your core wound, which you aren't worthy and deserving of love, girl. And do you want that to be your truth? Is that truly your truth? Because if it is, then your fate is sealed. And if not, then it's time to get to work.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's absolutely 100% it. And what people resist is the discomfort of actually feeling that, of being the observer of my life and going, Amy, you doing this, you're choosing this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's uncomfortable. And what I find is that people are unwilling to hang in that discomfort because they've been numb for so long. And the world teaches us to numb.
Yeah.
Even our, like, I mean, even our systems are, because they're so corrupt, and because the insurance companies and all of these things that like really determine how we recover, they don't leave room for these things to open up, to explore, because diagnostic codes are necessary, and then medications are necessary, and the medications then numb in a different way. It's like I left treatment every single time with like all these prescriptions that I would never take, but I was like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, this isn't necessary. And for some people, maybe it is, right? But again, my physiology was saying no, no, no. And the doctor was saying yes, until the sober living that I lived in at the last time. And I finally met someone who was like, okay, I'm going to listen to you because you seem very powerful. And I was like, it took like me convincing this beautiful man. but who still, in my opinion, overprescribes,
Yeah.
it's so. Mm.
Well, and the thing is that what most people don't recognize and understand is that the overprescription of medications is so that they can code the individual as a higher level of care, which
Yeah.
then validates a longer stay and more reimbursement from the insurance companies. And I will be very honest, I have seen so many absolutely disgusting, heartbreaking, ugly things in this industry specifically. I had no idea that, with some of these recovery centers, that the owners would literally encourage addicts to come in, get the insurance going, and then they would provide them with the drugs in order to stay in the system. And
Yep.
I was just so heartbroken. I can't tell you how many places I've had to walk away from because I absolutely refuse to be a part of anything of that nature. I'm here to truly help individuals recover and overcome all of these limitations that they've been conditioned to believe they have.
Well,
And
and that's where because all of the agency gets
mhm,
taken away
mhm,
because we're still giving power to the substance.
right.
We're still giving power to a system that's bigger than you. We're sitting in your feelings,
Mhm,
like, both of us really chose to do to be here now
right.
was actually what would be, 30 days of sitting in my feelings is way more effective than any medication
Mhm,
with but everyone doesn't have that agency. Everyone doesn't have that. They do have it, but
right.
it's been so conditioned that, listen to the white coats, listen to what everyone else is telling you. And I believe like you and I are so on the same page of like, it's a remembrance process. It's a remembering who you are at your core, even though your nervous system has been dysregulated since in utero,
Yeah.
which so many of us have had dysregulated nervous systems since in utero. And it's something that I still work with every day. Like my nervous system surprises me all of the time. I'm like, wow, like I'm really activated and I'm 3 again.
You know,
That's okay.
Speaking to that, I have to share a recent discovery that I had had. It was a couple of months ago, and I'm here at my home. My daughters are here. My cousin is here. My guy that I'm dating is there, and we're preparing this meal. And I'm just like, oh my god, I'm so happy. And then all of the sudden, anxiety overcame me so badly that I was like debilitated. And I'm going, what the fuck is going on? I'm like, Heather, what the fuck is going on here, man? You should be happy. Like, why are you experiencing all of this anxiety? And then that's when I had the realization, holy fuck, the anxiety is being created by the happiness. It's the happiness that is triggering the anxiety because my subconscious is being challenged right now. And historically, it hasn't been safe to celebrate and enjoy and be happy because it was taken away so quickly, right? So I always
Yes.
had the guard up. So having that realization and being able, and then I talked about it. I said to everyone, I'm like, oops, stop. Hey, everyone, I need your attention. Here's what I'm dealing with right now. I'm really freaking out because I'm so fucking happy making all of these tacos and sharing all of this time with you guys. My nervous system is going, this isn't safe. This is going to end tragically. And I literally had to talk it out and redirect the thoughts. And within, I would say, less than 40 minutes, it dissipated. And I was truly able to live in the moment, be present
Mm.
with everyone, and embrace all of the joy and happiness.
Yeah. Oh, and if you like, that's the whole thing. First of all, so beautiful. And oh, like when you read my bio or whatever, I get all tingly and excited because that's what it's about. Like
Mhm.
my work is about supporting the nervous system to expand with the good, to
Yeah.
have it and to hold it. Because that's where it gets tricky in recovery. When we start to go to that next level, when we start to actually shed, the victim thoughts and also the victim feeling. When
Mhm.
the good starts to come, the nervous system does not have the capacity, which beautifully explained it. And when I moved into this house in Texas, I experienced the same thing. There was like 7 people all like unpacking my boxes, and I stopped and I said, This is a lot for me. I've been in California pretty much alone my whole life with like, beautiful men in my life and friends, but never as a conscious, sober woman, allowing so many people to give to me. So I'm very uncomfortable right now. And I just want to say that out loud. My heart is exploding with love. And it's hard for me to receive. And everyone was just like, okay. And just kind of went back on. And it took some deep breaths. It took some saying it out loud. It took all of these things, but that was a massive field expansion in my
Absolutely.
nervous system to be like, I am safe to receive. I am safe to receive. I'm safe to receive. And more is coming and more is coming. And that's what next level recovery is. That's what like, oh yeah, I did this for a reason.
So in my opinion, that takes vulnerability and transparency,
Oh yeah.
right? We have to choose to be vulnerable, accept and acknowledge what we're feeling and experiencing, not being ashamed of it, not feeling guilty for it, having the ability to verbalize it to those that want to support us, and then allow ourselves to receive all of the things in return. So,
Yeah. And I mean, it feels like you might break right wide open.
oh yeah.
Like you might turn into a puddle. And can that be okay?
Mhm.
Like that's what I ask myself. I'm like, can this be okay right now? Like I feel like it's too much. Like I love, especially as we were talking a little bit before we started recording about the divine masculine and divine feminine energy of like at my core, I am so feminine. Just want to receive and love. Like ask any of my friends my whole life. Like I am just such a fucking lover.
Yes.
And I masked that with alcohol, with drugs, with success,
Mhm.
with being my own boss, with being an entrepreneur for like my whole life. I started my first business in high school.
Wow.
Like, like just all of these masculine masks, like preventing me from really being in this like beautiful open vulnerability that is who I am, who I be, who I've always been.
Right.
And that takes a lot of vulnerability.
It does. I recorded a podcast. I want to say it was maybe August or September of 2020 with Jake Woodard. And we were exploring the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And it was so astonishing what was uncovered in that interview for myself. And it was literally a life-changing moment. But what I hadn't realized up to that point is that I was so enthralled in my masculine as a safety measure, to use control, to try to perfect, and all of these things as an attempt to not be judged, not be criticized, so that everyone would think I was worthy and deserving of
Mm.
blah, 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 blah. And having that moment, what we ended up discovering was that when I was in kindergarten, and the whole nap time situation, well, I went over and did what I always did to soothe and relax my nervous system, which was humping my pillow or the
Yeah,
blanket.
masturbating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there I am masturbating. The teacher comes over, grabs me, yanks me out into the hallway, tells me how terrible I am, calls my mother. Then I go home. My mom has this conversation with me, shaming me around what I was doing to naturally soothe. That was the only mechanism I knew how to cope with at that age. And unfortunately, that really created some serious issues around my femininity and my ability to receive. There was
Absolutely.
so much guilt and shame around choosing to receive pleasure. And this went beyond just sexual pleasure. It was any kind of pleasure in life. I did
Yeah.
not have the ability to receive it because I was using the shield of the masculine, basically, in order to protect myself. It served a purpose, but it wasn't
Yeah.
the purpose that I truly desired. So I had to let that shield down. And then I just got married last weekend to my divine masculine. I feel so, so supported, so blessed. And I'm so excited to see where this journey is going to take me and how I'm able to really step into that feminine role and embrace all the things that are truly the core of my being.
Yeah, and receive all the pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So many people are going to identify with that, like, masturbation and self-pleasure, especially as small children. We don't have any idea what that really
Right.
is something that was taken away from so many of us, close your legs. You're not being a lady, da, da, da. And, I have a lot of different stories of sexual trauma in my life. And one of them is like, that was one of my main ways to cope, which led to all kinds of weird things with my cousins, with my brother, like da da da. And it's like, if people have the language around this, then we can support these small people in such a different way.
Right.
And that's why sex, intimacy, pleasure, and all the things, I talk about it all the time, because first of all, I'm very comfortable talking about it, but also because, like, fuck, we need to talk about this stuff.
Yes.
Because when it's hidden, when it's isolated, that's when all this weird porn stuff starts happening, and all of this, like, just rubbing one out to have like a pelvic sneeze rather than to have like real orgasmic energy flowing through your body and life force energy. And yeah, like, I'm very familiar with his work, and like all of this work is just so important to the recovery spaces, because we're recovering all the parts of ourselves.
Absolutely.
Here now.
One thing that I find extremely prevalent is that majority of the individuals who are going into recovery process have some sort of underlying sexual abuse at a very, very early age. And it really breaks my heart that we haven't given society the permission to talk about the why behind these things. Why are these things happening? Why is it coming at, the reality is that when that sexual abuse is endured, it literally changes how do I say this? The projection of where that adult is going to show up. You know what I mean? And
Well, the
unfortunately,
nervous system's changed forever.
But it
We can
doesn't
heal
have
it.
to stay there.
Yeah, we can regroove it. I think you refer to yours as like rewiring. I refer to my methodologies as regrooving. It's like, we can create a new pathway, but it means hanging in the discomfort to create the new pathway. And even though we're suffering in the old pathway, it's very comfortable. It's very familiar. And so just like you were staying in your best thinking at that time was to walk up the stairs and slit your wrist and enjoy the beautiful view while you're doing it. But then you listened to the new uncomfortable pathway and you went for a walk, and then that changed your life forever. And then 2 years later, you have this conversation on your podcast, and then bam, here he comes, right? He's there, and now you're married. Like, this is that's the whole thing right there.
Yeah. And it's
there's still a lifetime of work for it to keep going.
It's funny though, because the last couple of months when we made the decision to get married, and I've kept our relationship extremely private. Like, when I announced on social media that I was married, people were like, say what? Like, we didn't even know there was a man. But I wanted to give myself the opportunity to truly have the ability to cultivate a healthy relationship. And I wanted to keep all of the, I wanted to keep it private and really do the work. And it is so beautiful what I have experienced with him. I mean, like nothing I've ever received before. And as we made that decision to get married, all of a sudden, the subconscious was telling me all of these stories. It's too soon. This isn't right. All of these stories started popping in, trying to convince me that I wasn't making the right decision. And so I had to really be proactive at recognizing what was truly happening in this moment. My core fears were trying to come back and be like, hey, no, we're the role players here, not you. And then have the ability to redirect those thoughts into a place that allowed me to receive what was meant to be. But it's a process, and we have to keep going there and doing it over and over and over.
Yeah.
It's honestly one of the most beautiful gifts we can give ourselves. Bottom line is this, listeners. You're either in an uncomfortable position attached to your pain and suffering, or you choose to get uncomfortable and then release the pain and suffering and allow yourself to receive that joy. And it is a process. It does take time. We have to reevaluate our expectations of, how quickly we receive XYZ. But it all starts with giving ourselves permission to go there.
Yeah. And I want to bring us back to, where I have my most freedom was really, I started studying trauma in college.
Mhm.
And so really giving myself permission to understand that it was my physiology, because that helped release me from my guilt and my shame. And then when I discovered parts work and started to discover all of my different parts, then I was able to integrate
Mhm.
and start to get to know the different parts of me and the physiology that activated the different parts of me.
Yes.
And so if this doesn't make any sense to you right now, like my best suggestion is like feel
Mhm.
your way back to yourself and find mentorship,
Right.
find guidance, because our
Absolutely.
nervous systems will block us from doing this all day long. Like it just, it's just like, it's not going to happen. And interestingly, like all of my mentors that had the biggest influence in me do not consider themselves in recovery.
Mhm.
Like my biggest even today I have like 4 or 5 coaches, and they stretch my nervous system in like these massive ways. They don't understand the recovery space. They don't understand physical dependency. And that's what I want. That's what I crave, because I know my stuff,
Mhm.
and it help me expand my nervous system in different ways without the identity of the bullshit that was keeping me stuck.
Right, right. Yeah, I love that. That's such a great point that you bring up, and I appreciate that. When you say that there are so many mentors that you've had who don't identify as being in recovery, I personally don't really identify myself as being in recovery. I've released that whole attachment. And instead, I try to view it as I'm in creation. I'm in creation. That's what I am.
Yeah. And that's what the feminine is. We're
Yeah.
creators, right? So, I mean, that's like goosebumps, all of the things.
No.
And I want to remind the people who identify in the gender of masculine or male, that all of us have these two energies. So just in case there was any confusion there, there's a difference between gender and then the energies of the masculine and the feminine. So we all have a creator within us, and we all have that rock or that structure within us as well. And getting to know these energies within you does provide so much freedom.
Absolutely. And, unfortunately, society for thousands of years now has really, really embraced the masculine as a whole umbrella for all. And we have suppressed those feminine energies. And now we've got a society where now even the masculine is being challenged. And we're like supposed to be in this neutral state of what? You know what I mean? I'm like, what the fuck is going on right now? It's
Yeah. Oh, the feminine's rising. I mean,
it's so exciting.
yeah, it's so
It
exciting. And
is.
it doesn't mean that the masculine structures aren't, necessary. We're dismantling.
The taxes.
We're pulling on strings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that we're really in a paradigm where the toxicity around it and the purposes that the toxicity has served that have helped create all of the corruption in these systems, keeping humanity enslaved, keeping our vibrational frequencies very low, which
Mhm.
supports us having all of the unhealthy coping skills that are extremely profitable.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like that's the whole thing. It's all comes. Yeah.
That's
That would be a whole nother podcast.
Well, we might have to have it because that's one thing that I chat a lot with my clients is that, do you want to keep feeding this corrupt system? Do you want to keep feeding it and allowing it to survive? The system is what's gotten you here. You have to choose. And in my opinion, the most vital resources we have available are our time, our energy, and our financial resources. We have to get
Absolutely.
really picky and choosy about how we want to start allocating this in order to abolish our current situation and give ourselves the permission to receive that heaven on earth, which we are all meant to live in.
Yeah, and actually feel the feelings of what it feels like to be there, not just all of the feelings, not just the good ones,
Right.
right? Like all of the feelings, to actually experience what it's like to to be in a relationship with your time,
Yeah.
to be in a relationship with your money, to
Mhm.
be in a relationship with your full expression.
Yeah.
You know, like that is the whole thing.
Absolutely. I have a individual out there who follows me and messages me for, frequently, and they're 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 pretty young adult, we'll call it. And it breaks my heart because this individual is just hurting so badly within and does not have permission to show emotion, is taught that if they, cry, this is a bad thing. And I know this resonates for me because as a young child, I had so much emotion. But when I cried, my mom perceived that as a fault of her own, that, she had done something wrong in order for me to feel sad and want to express this emotion. So it was suppressed. It wasn't safe to show. And as a result of that, I shut that down. I shut that sucker down for a long
Yeah.
time and just numbed out. So to individuals right now listening who have been so conditioned that it's not safe to show emotion, how do they give themselves permission? Where do they start? How do they get help? Help.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's so good because I still to this day, crying is not something that happens very frequently, maybe like once every 6 months or so. Um, and so I, first of all, that's not the only way to show emotion, y'all. Like all of this is energy in our bodies. And so one of the first things that I do, and I don't, the visuals that I'm doing right now is just literally shaking my body out. Hip circles, right? Sweat
Yeah.
is a way that that's being released. I sweat profusely.
Mhm.
Like, and I'm just like, oh goodness, I'm releasing something. If you notice your body shaking a bit,
Uh-huh.
if you don't have permission in the traditional sense to show emotion, scream in pillows.
Mhm.
If you can't scream yet because your throat is so closed, like start writing it. Do a fear inventory every night. Like just remember that energy is energy is energy. And however it releases from your body, that's perfect. It's fucking perfect.
That's beautiful.
And yeah, and to celebrate it when it happens. You know, if I shed a tear by accident on a client call, I'm like, oh my God, I think I just cried. Yay.
So I'm going to challenge you because here's one of the barriers that I personally faced with learning
Okay.
how to express emotion.
Mm.
It wasn't safe for me to verbally speak it. It wasn't safe for me to physically show it, and it wasn't safe for me to write it. I can remember at a very early age, my mother found my diary, and then all hell broke loose. How can you think these things? And then from there, I learned it wasn't safe to write anything down because then you got the evidence and that shit's going to come back on you. So, for the individual who truly feels trapped, that they have no idea where to get started with learning how to embrace and express this emotion that the body is holding and carrying, how do they manage that?
Mm. Well, so here's the process that I would take someone through the nervous system is, can we notice that energy in your body? And that might be enough.
Mhm.
Can you just start to notice the energy? You don't have to tell anybody about it.
Mhm.
You don't have to have a name for it, right? But eventually you'll have a name for it. And this is the system that, like, this is really truly noticing that, like, wow, I have sensation
Mhm.
in my body. You're going to start to judge yourself. You're going to make it wrong. You're going to complain to yourself. You're going to try to make it stop. And my suggestion is to start very slowly. If you can hang for 10 seconds, awesome. If you can hang for 5 seconds, Awesome. And then as you hang with it a little longer, then maybe you can name it. Maybe it has a color. Maybe it has something to say to you. And then that's where we start to name it. Right? And this noticing and naming process will support you to just basically start to gently accept that you have sensation and that you are fucking alive.
Yes.
That you're alive, and it's so natural and it's so normal.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And in addition to that, one of the things that allowed for me to really help transition and be able to feel and express emotion was connecting with breath. Breath was something that was so closed off, and I didn't know how to live because I didn't know how to breathe. And so it just all stayed stuck. And learning how to embrace breath, I actually had to hire a professional and take private lessons because it was so debilitating. And there was so much judgment and criticism around, why the fuck can't I breathe? Like, it's a natural thing. Why can't I breathe? So that for me was the barrier that allowed for me to kind of step through the door and then have the ability to start exploring all of the other modalities. So thank you.
Yeah,
Amy.
absolutely. And just to add on to that, so you said like if you're really stuck, it's my 3 things that I remind people of are breath, sound, movement, breath, sound, movement, breath, sound, movement. And my recovery journey started before I knew a lot, but the yoga mat, stepping on that yoga mat in 1999 was where I got introduced to somatic experiencing and all of the other things. Not to say that I didn't use drugs and alcohol for a real long time after that still. Right. However, breath, sound, movement all day long.
I love it. I love it. I love it. This is why sound bowls are so powerful, receiving those vibrational frequencies. Amy, this has been honestly such a pleasure to have an opportunity to chat with you and share your expertise and your own personal journey with the listeners. I know for myself, you've given me some great tips today to keep embracing and moving forward on this journey. I truly would love to have another interview with you. I think there's some things that we could dive much, much deeper into. But thank you for all of the work. How can the listeners connect with you? How can they find you?
Everything's the same. It's at Thrive in Recovery with Amy. So you don't have to wonder what it is. Thrive in Recovery with Amy. And, all types of recovery is important. And whether it's a broken heart or trauma or substance misuse, like it's all there.
I love that you chose part of your business to be about thriving, because myself, with this podcast, Think Yourself Healthy, it's taking us from surviving to thriving, and it's possible. We all have the ability to do it. And truthfully, we can do it much sooner than we think, right? It's a process that I think back to my journey, and I just read a letter that I had written to myself in January of 2020. I just found it. It was sealed up in an envelope. I pulled it out and I was like, intuitively, I knew this damn pandemic and major changes were coming. And I'm reading this letter going, wow, I am a profound being. I am so blessed. I am so lucky. I have so much to celebrate. It was such a neat, powerful moment. And tears were coming down my face as I'm reading joy and so much emotion. It was so magical.
Yeah.
So letters to yourselves, because they can be really powerful.
Oh gosh, so powerful. Yeah. And a reminder that like trauma happens in an instant and can also be healed in an instant.
Absolutely. Such a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. That is such a great point. And there's so much truth to that statement. Amy, thank you. God bless you. Thank you. Anything last minute you want to share with the listeners?
I think we got it all today. I'd love to come back and like really dig deep on one of these things, because maybe we'll ask the listeners what you want to hear more about, and then we can go from there.
That's a great. Listeners, let us know what you and Amy, or that myself and Amy love to hear us chat about.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It's all right. It's a day, huh?
Yeah. Take good care of yourself. Yes.
Thanks for joining us on the Think Yourself Healthy podcast. Make sure you leave a review and let me know what you think. I love reading your feedback. Come hang out with me on Instagram at Heather Duranja, and don't forget to take a screenshot that you're listening to the podcast and tag me. I love to share it. See you on the next episode.